slap that badge on the back of any Porsche 911 and the world just blurs. 2025 marks 50 years that the 911 Turbo has been taunting other cars that identify as fast, showing them the true meaning of speed, of composure, and even luxury. 50 years. For perspective, the movie Jaws came out 50 years ago. If that doesn't mean anything to you, how about this? The car in front of me is a 1975, which makes it 50 years old. 50 years before that was 1925. And in 1925, half of the households in America didn't have, no, not cell service, not even fast internet, electricity. That is how much can change in 50 years. So let's celebrate one of the longest running nameplates in the history of the automobile. From the original 930 Widowmaker to today's 50th anniversary special edition, through to tomorrow's electrified hybrid 911 Turbo, and all of the other turbocharged giant slayers that have come between. On the road, on the Autobahn, and on the racetrack. From Pikes Peak to Le Mans. This is Porsche, 50 years of the 911 Turbo. These two cars, the original 1975 Porsche 911 Turbo and today's 50th anniversary special edition 911 Turbo, are of course separated by a half century, but they share more than just their badge. Of course, they have the same silhouette, a rear-mounted flat-six engine, delicious tartan upholstery on the seats, and even inside the glove box on the 2025 car, a subtle nod to the 911 Turbo's modus operandi, understatement. The Turbo's calling card is a level of overall performance sufficient to compete with sometimes ostentatious supercars, but without the need to call attention to any of it. Just a relatively subtle, curvaceously flared body with a whale-tail spoiler. And enough firepower to knock you half unconscious with the G-forces. There are very few cars on planet Earth fast enough to make this thing even break a sweat. And it's not just the speed, it's the grip and it's the composure. It makes everything so easy. Every time you drive a 911 Turbo, you're left wondering, why is everyone else going so slow? Every turbo model has been the fastest and the most powerful variant of the regular 911 lineup. But with the march of time, the Turbo has also become the most civilized. However, it did not start out that way. This thing must have blown everyone's minds. It is still fast today. The 911 Turbo story starts in 1973. Porsche was developing a turbocharged variant of its flat-six engine. The first time that engine appeared in a 911 was in this car, given to Ferdinand Porsche's daughter, Louise Piech, for her 70th birthday. But Porsche didn't develop its turbocharged engine just for Mrs. Piech. It developed it to go racing. And the racing rule book required that Porsche build 400 road-going examples of that turbocharged race car within 24 months. Porsche executives weren't sure they'd be able to convince 400 customers to buy one within 2 years. Boy, were they wrong. When the production 911 Turbo made its first appearance at the 1974 Frankfurt Motor Show, it sold out not in 24 months, but almost overnight. Porsche would go on to produce more than 50 times as many as the 400 it needed for racing homologation. In other words, Porsche made almost 22,000 930 turbos.
Speed sells. It always does. This was the world's first production turbocharged sports car, and it made 260 horsepower. That's 100 more than the already fast 911 Carrera. The Turbo was more than just a faster 911. It was a whale-tailed animal with bulging fenders so broad that it looked like it could barely contain its own power. This spoiler meant business, and those fenders gave it sexy curves for more visual cachet than an already highly regarded car. It was, in a word, gorgeous. The Turbo had all of the speed to back up those looks. It was, by a huge margin, the quickest accelerating car you could buy. It hit 60 miles an hour in 4.9 seconds in smog-choked 1975, when the next quickest car the magazines tested took 3 seconds longer. If you were brave enough to keep your foot in it long enough, the Turbo did 156 miles an hour, making it also the fastest car you could buy in America. All of that thrust added 2 new dimensions to the 911's handling. Firstly, it made enough power that it could actually overwhelm the rear wheels, something very difficult to do in a rear-engine 911, which has huge traction at the back.
The second dimension is time. It can take seconds between when you mash the pedal and when the engine responds with its full anger. This is known as turbo lag.
I've now applied full throttle. With a compression ratio of just 6.5 to 1, this engine makes absolutely no power off boost. Still floored. The combination of the huge power, the enormous discrepancy between output on and off boost, and the delay, which itself changes based on revs, by the way, I'm still floored, makes the 930 a mother to control when the boost finally hits. There. My word! Sometimes it makes absolutely no power when you really need it. And then others, it suddenly makes way more than the rear tires can cope with, like going around a bend. As such, the 911 Turbo easily earned its nickname, the Widowmaker. However,
all the qualities that made the Turbo a Widowmaker on the road helped it to be a win-maker on the racetrack. The racing version of the 911 Turbo was called the 935, and any history book on motor racing will have an entire section devoted to it.
In the motorsport world, they have turned a 911 into a missile. It took the highest level of horsepower, highest level of aero, started running them down the Mulsanne straight.
The 935 is one of the winningest racing cars in history, with victories across nearly every category of racing, including and especially its endurance racing wins. It won the 12 Hours of Sebring and the 24 Hours of Daytona 6 times each, to say nothing of its 1979 overall victory at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, an improbable and historic first ever win for a rear-engine race car at that storied event.
The race Le Mans is basically the definition of Porsche in racing. They run together. They're in each other's DNA. It became battles within.
The question wasn't which manufacturer would win, but instead which Porsche was going to win.
Despite all of those successes on the racetrack, the 911 is, after all, a road car. Porsche is never one to rest on its laurels, so the turbo got more displacement, more compression, and even more power. And then, an all-new car. The 964.
The 964 chassis 911 got upgrades everywhere. Coil spring suspension in place of the old torsion bars, anti-lock brakes, power steering, and the turbo model eventually got more displacement, more compression, more power, and less lag. It was simultaneously more advanced and more usable.
My mind goes right to the movie Bad Boys. The really cool story about that 964 Turbo, a 3.6, was the director Michael Bay put his own personal car into the film. And little did he know that car would be more than iconic. I mean, it stamped the 964 for audiences all over the world. That car had such wide hips and great body lines, and it fit the persona of the movie. I think the 964 will forever be associated with Bad Boys.
But there was one extra special variant of the 964 Turbo.
This car that I'm driving here, the 964 Turbo S Lightweight, the weight savings came from different materials and composites in the bodywork, but the creature comforts certainly were shed. No AC, no power steering. It's a very connected feeling. But there is more noise from the road. There is more vibration. It is a little stiffer. I love it. It's the ultimate canyon carver. There's no mistaking that air-cooled Porsches are hot in the market. But if you really had to debate having only one, it would be hard to argue against a 964 Turbo S or even a 964 Turbo S Lichtbau. There's only 86 of these ever built. It's a stamp of history, not only in Porsche's timeline, but in pop culture.
In performance, the Turbo was on top of the world, and Porsche wasn't afraid to talk about it.
The 80s and 90s were a classic time for Porsche advertising. I shot the jumping turbo. There was a poster everywhere. It was in Seinfeld's apartment, in the show.
And when it came time for the final version of the air-cooled 911, the 993, Porsche made sure its advertising stayed focused on the turbo.
And they came up with a headline, "Kills Bugs Fast." It couldn't be just a regular 911. That had to be the turbo.
That bug-killing 993 Turbo was visually similar to previous 911s, but was almost an entirely new car underneath. It had massive improvements everywhere, including and especially its rear suspension, which was engineered to minimize the oversteer that had given it the Widowmaker reputation in the first place.
I definitely think that the 993 was such a game changer because it kind of looked to the future in many ways, but it also looked to the past. Any 911 is going to be the best car that you can get. They just do everything right and everything that you want them to. And this 993 is particularly special because it's the last 911 that was air-cooled. It's also all-wheel drive. This 993, of course, doesn't have any of the driver aids that we get nowadays, like stability control. And so you really have to know how to drive. I think we're losing that art in the newer cars. Of course, new cars are amazing because they're powerful and capable, but this really brings you back to what it means to be on an open road. Getting to drive the 993 on this road makes me feel connected to my family.
The Unser family was part of the first ever Pikes Peak hill climb race in 1926. And decades later, it's Loni's turn.
My first time driving a 911 Turbo was on Pikes Peak. When I got into that car, I thought that it was gonna behave in a way that was diabolical, but it surprised me because it did the exact opposite. Anything that I would do, it would respond so well. It really felt like the perfect tool to go and race up a mountain road. When I was asked to come do this, they didn't know that this is my dream car. I would love to have one of these. It's just the perfect car.
Perfect for the road, perhaps, but there was one more special track-focused version of the 993 Turbo that didn't wear a turbo badge at all. It was the GT2.
.993s, whether they're Carreras or this GT2, they were decades ahead in how modern they feel, how advanced they feel, the suspension and brakes, and how connected everything feels. And that's the best of both worlds, because you can take it out for a stroll to the office, or you can tighten down these harnesses and go out on the weekend and hang with anything in the canyons.
But this turbocharged Porsche says GT on the back, and in the language of Porsche, GT means racing. The GT2 was the road-going, rear-drive only racing homologation version of the 911 Turbo. This one, the final variant, one of just 21 1998 GT2s ever made.
I'm sitting in a race 5-point harness, Recaro race seats. I mean, everything about this car screams racing. 450 horsepower, all of that power through the rear axle. There's something so raw about the aesthetics of this car. The way that the wheel arch extensions are sort of just screwed onto the outside of the car. Massive whale tail wing. I can't think of a more rare, iconic, race-inspired car.
And what a fitting end for the road-going 993, and therefore the air-cooled 911. Its long run had finally come to an end. The world had changed in the 911's 30-some years. Its air-cooled engine no longer worked in an era of emissions controls. The 911's small Spartan interior no longer met the demands of premium sports car buyers. And so it seemed that Stuttgart's air-cooled rocket had reached the end of its life. For the road, anyway. Because on the racetrack, things were about to boil over.
The 65th running of the Le Mans 24-hour race promised to be one of the most open for years. With a new generation of GT cars setting the pace at the head of the field, Porsche's brand new water-cooled GT1 cars showed promise, but came up short. 2 years later, in 1998, it was the Porsche flags that flew highest as their cars cruised to a 1-2 finish.
This would be Porsche's 16th win at Le Mans, a record-breaking achievement. Porsche also produced some 20 street versions of the GT1 cars, which foreshadowed road-going Porsches to come.
Turns out the GT1 was a testbed for an all-new 911. The 996 was the first ground-up redesign of the Porsche 911 since the original had gone into production more than 30 years earlier. And the new car needed a rethink of just about everything. But at least the 996 kept the essence of what makes a 911 a 911. The silhouette, the flat six at the back, not to mention beautiful steering and magnificent brakes. The Turbo appeared a couple of years later using a road-going 3.6-liter version of the GT1's water-cooled flat six. It was once again an absolute rocket. But it was actually no quicker in acceleration than the old 993 and offered no real improvements in handling or braking either. That sounds pretty disappointing, but that's also a bit of a myopic view because the 996 Turbo was able to replicate its predecessor's performance while meeting the demands of modern fuel economy, safety, noise, and emission standards is, in and of itself, an engineering triumph.
And almost more importantly, this new 911 was far less expensive to produce. Porsche was once again able to make a profit on it, something absolutely necessary to ensure the continuation of the lineup. And also, this all happened while the 911 gained major additional bandwidth. It was bigger, quieter, smoother, rode better, more comfortable, more luxurious, adding in features that were notably absent on its air-cooled predecessor. Things like heat that actually heated, or aircon that conned air.
The turbo was available for the very first time with an automatic transmission, which underscored the beginning of its transition to an everyday grand tourer. Look, the 996 is widely regarded as not the best generation of 911, but you have to remember, this was just the kicking off point for the entire second act of the Porsche 911. And because Porsche is Porsche, improvement was continual.
.997 was a refinement of everything. It was taking all the best parts and putting it into one package. A turbo, the platform, everything that they built into it was really strong. It was really a transitional car. It wasn't just the first of the water-cooled cars, it was the development of the water-cooled car. And therefore, this turbo represented kind of the best of all the parts and the best of everything to that point.
The 997 GT2, like its 993 GT2 predecessor, sent its power just to the rear wheels, and oh, the power it made. This GT2 RS made 620 metric horsepower, but it was more than just a rocket.
I really enjoy the visceral, the tactile experience of driving cars like this. You know, we get kind of used to the modern cars where everything's so compliant and maybe slightly removed at times, and this is so direct. You're kind of reminded of how reactive it is. The car is alive. Just being two-wheel drive makes it a really special experience. So this is the first time I've been in this car in 14 years. This is the car I drove at Pikes Peak in 2011, the GT2 RS. Awesome car, loaded with carbon fiber, traction control. It was a weapon for me. When I had this car built by Porsche Motorsport in Santa Ana, California, the goal was to drive it to Pikes Peak. So we embarked on a 2-day road trip in a red, no numbers GT2 RS, this very same car, and drove it over 1,100 miles to the base of Pikes Peak. We ended up putting numbers on it, a few sponsors, and went off to race this car. In those years, half the mountain was dirt. And when we show up with a production two-wheel drive GT2 RS like this with 600 plus horsepower, it was kind of an eyes wide open moment. But at the same time, Metzger motor, the balance of the new 997 chassis, it was a combination of things that worked really well there.
Including and especially the fact that the GT2 was a turbocharged 911. The Pikes Peak race starts at 9,400 feet above sea level and ends at over 14,000. At these elevations, you can barely breathe, and neither can a naturally aspirated engine. Turbos compensate for altitude, helping the GT2 maintain its output the whole way up the hill.
When we did get there, we had a flawless run on race day, ended up setting a production car record. And you know, the vibe that was built during Pikes Peak week was we had actually driven this car to the race. Everybody knew the production roots of this car. And so when we did so well up there, the crowd was behind it. You know, after the race, you drive down, all the spectators are lining the edges of the course. One of the spectators leans into the car and says, "You drove it out here, you drove it out here." The fun thing about turbos is, you know, you put your foot down and there's this whoosh. It's almost like free horsepower. It pushes you back in the seat. This car is an absolute rocket.
And it was only going to get faster. The next generation of 911 Turbo was the 991, and it marked an important transition. The 911 was now not just a sports car, it was a supercar. Four-wheel steering, dual-clutch automatic only, and active aerodynamics. It had a new transaxle that moved the rear wheels 3 inches rearward to further eliminate the Widowmaker reputation. This was a machine with a singular focus on easy-to-manage performance around a racetrack, especially in its rear-wheel drive GT2 RS form, which broke the production car record here at Germany's tortuous Nürburgring Nordschleife.
The first time I've driven the Nürburgring is like 17 years ago. I haven't seen such bad conditions often around this place, to be honest. You really understand why people call it the green hell. The Nürburgring Nordschleife has proven to be the place where everybody proves their cars, proves their drivers. It's the most challenging, where you race with like 300 kilometers per hour. It's pretty tricky today. I grew up 10 kilometers from Weissach. My dad was working at Porsche as an engineer, and I heard the race cars driving on the test track. It's always been a dream to be involved with Porsche. Then ending up going to the Nürburgring, setting records is pretty cool. We set a record with the normal 991 Gen 2 GT2 RS, and the Lamborghini guys came here, broke my record. This is where this car came from, and then we just started optimizing stuff, putting the dampers of the race car, more aero, just the normal stuff, and it turned out to be an incredible machine. You're never gonna have a perfect lap, but I think this record was the record at the ring for like the next 4 years. This just tells how drivable and how really good the 991 was. I think for a day like today, a normal 991 Turbo with the four-wheel drive would definitely be beneficial. So for me, the 991 Gen 2 Turbo, the car that suits all situations the best. Even after like 5 years or 4 years driving it, it's still mega. From like a car in previous generation was kind of like a Widowmaker, now being really drivable, I think, yeah, tells a lot about the quality of this car and about also the people who engineered it. I just wheeled it, but yeah, proud to be part of it. I had a lot of people like reaching out because they own the same car I've set the record in, and this really makes a difference for them, and it made me proud, making them proud. That's why this car will always have a special place in my heart.
The 991 GT2 RS wasn't just faster than any 911 before it, but it was also easier to access that performance no matter what the conditions, which made it the perfect companion to battle North America's most challenging racecourse. Yep, let's go back to Pikes Peak. Porsche used that same turbocharged 911 GT2 RS as the basis for a rolling tribute to the old 935 race car from some 4 decades earlier, and Porsche sent the tribute racing up the mountain.
As a young photographer, I went to Le Mans multiple times and photographed epic battles, whether it be 935, 962s. My first thought was, I've got to figure out how to get one of those to race at Pikes Peak. Getting the race at a place that I call home, but in a car that was based, inspired, and motivated by the success of the 935. It was really a special moment. You go in so early in the morning, you watch the sun rise. There was this shape outside of our trailer that I'd never really thought that I would see at Pikes Peak, and that was the 935. It's so long and so sleek. I'm a photographer. I visualize things. When I drove that car, I was thinking, what does it look like on the outside? Because Pikes Peak had never seen a 935 up there. Pikes Peak is a bit like watching a movie through your windshield. The trees are all around you. The sun's coming up early morning in practice. You're just pulling gears. It's pushing you back in the seat. The flow and the cadence of Pikes Peak is so important. But this car is a bit of magic for you. It does everything so well that you almost remove the speed out of it. When you drop yourself into that seat and feel the bodywork and everything around you, it really does feel like it's part of you. You're wearing that car. It works in sync with you. The characteristics of Pikes Peak, tight and technical on the bottom, middle is just wild hairpins turning against the sky, late braking into the corners, and then the top is just let the car run. The long wheelbase, the power would just pull you through that, and I experienced a level of aero that gave you a confidence at the top that I hadn't witnessed in any of the previous 911s I'd driven.
The successor to the 991 is the 992. It's an evolution with a wider body and an additional forward gear in its transmission, but the biggest change is even more speed. The 992 Turbo S makes 640 horsepower, 60 more than the Turbo S that came before it.
It is biblically fast. This thing is as quick as the 918 Spider was, which was $1 million hypercar just 10 years ago. Look, in today's world, electric cars have won the race where acceleration is concerned, but not sustained long-distance, high-speed cruising. There, the combustion engine reigns supreme. And this combustion engine feels very turbocharged. Lag, lag, lag. There it is. Look, there's just no way around it. Physics is physics. You put a turbo in a car, and you're gonna have to deal with lag.
Until now, because for the latest Turbo S, Porsche has added electricity into the mix, and that is a bit of a game changer.
Fresh out of the gates of the famous Weissach engineering facility in Germany, this is the most powerful series production 911 ever.
With 701 brake horsepower. And that old pause punch of turbos past is no more. The reason for this lack of lag is that this, shock horror, is now a hybrid with electric turbos.
It's the clever T-hybrid system that we first saw in the latest 911 GTS, but this time with two slightly smaller E-turbos instead of one big one.
How it works is that instead of having to wait for the turbos to spool up with exhaust gases as they would conventionally, now with the E-turbos this has a battery, a 1.9 kilowatt hour battery that can spin them up instantly. So as soon as you need that turbocharged thrust, wherever you are in the rev range, there it is.
That instant punch is also helped by a 60 kilowatt permanent magnet synchronous electric motor that's integrated into the transmission housing and has 139 pounds-feet of torque permanently on tap to fill any gaps.
And it is incredibly quick. I always think of 911 turbos and the launch. That is 0 to 62 in 2.5 seconds. And the amazing thing about the turbo is that it would do it again and again and again. Point to point down a road. This really is extraordinary. However, it's even cleverer than that, because where conventional turbos have wastegates to get rid of unwanted energy, This can redirect that energy back into the battery or directly into the electric motor. So as well as being incredibly powerful, this is actually more efficient as well.
And the hybrid system doesn't just help on the straights either.
Because thanks to the battery and the high voltage system, Porsche has been able to fit this with something called EHPDCC. They do love a set of initials in Weissach. It stands for Electro-Hydraulically Controlled Porsche Dynamic Chassis Control. Trips off the tongue. It's activated by this button here or by putting it all the way into Sport Plus.
It's a clever hydraulic system that reduces the roll of the car when required and keeps it more stable when cornering. It should be mentioned that the hybrid technology does come with one notable cost in the form of 85 kilos or 187 pounds added to the curb weight. But it's still a net gain.
And if you want an example of how this has all come together, straight line and cornering, this latest Turbo S has done a lap time around the Nürburgring Nordschleife of just 7 minutes and 3 seconds.
That's a whopping 14 seconds quicker than the previous turbo.
A hybrid 911 turbo might initially sound like something of an anathema, sacrilege to the half-century lineage of this car. But actually, I don't think it is. This is no Taycan turbo naming travesty.
As long as some actual turbos are retained, it's very logical that it should move on. The turbo has, after all, evolved throughout its 50-year existence, from scary rear-wheel drive monster to all-weather, everyday hypercar slayer. But this new Turbo S is definitely a fitting addition to the family.
It has that duality of character more than ever. This really is the everyday Clark Kent, as well as Superman.
Its continual improvement has defined the 911 Turbo's 50-year ascent. A dream for some, a holy grail for many, just the pinnacle of the 911 lineup. For then, for now, and hopefully another 50 years to come.